for being here. Like Lennon said, this is my 5,362nd Music Expo. Always, always happy to be here with you guys. My first time doing one of these virtually. I've bounced around to Boston, Miami, and I always participate in the San Francisco event, which is where I'm based. So welcome. This time around, I wanted to get my good friend Lennon involved with Music Expo because of the topic that we thought of, as well as, it's been hard to get him involved because of his location. So this was the perfect opportunity. So I'm going to let him introduce himself. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and then we will dig into our discussion for today. So Lennon, the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, well, it's good to know, that I'm in good hands here because you're like just ultra pro on this side of things. So I appreciate that you've had me involved. I'm really excited to be here. Laura, thank you to you as well for having me, and to all the other presenters here giving some incredible stuff. I thought all that stuff about Twitch and the live streaming and the podcasting and stuff was super valuable. So my name is Lennon. The last name is Bone. You can imagine that my adolescent years they may have left something to be desired. I guess the place to start is that I've always been a musician, as pretty much as long as I can remember. And I toured professionally for 10 years and then got deeper into production and writing for about 5 years after that. So I did music professionally for 15 years and still play and gig a lot. And the band that I was in, we were out on the road 150 plus days a year, toured over 14 different countries. I played on a couple different Billboard Top 200 records, and had the good fortune to co-write with a Grammy nominee and do some other stuff that, honestly, I only say because if I can do it, like, seriously, the world is anybody's oyster. That's my favorite thing to talk about, is like, the only thing that I do well, I think, is try to connect with people. And that is what we're going to talk about today, is connecting with people. I don't believe in tactics. I believe in things that have existed forever. And that is story, and that is connection. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
Beautifully said, man. Thank you. So, maybe that's one of the reasons we get along so well. I too am a lifelong musician. Started off on saxophone. I started DJing back in college, and I've done a ton of both live band as well as like electronic with live fused gigs over the course of my career. Playing Coachella was one of my highlights 2 years in a row, all over the Bay Area, a little bit up and down California, but certainly never a big kind of touring artist like you guys were, but played professionally my whole life, right? And then I've also worked in the business side of the music industry, from licensing to retail as a retail buyer, strategic marketing partnerships with big brands, and placing music in film and TV and commercials, as well as publishing and licensing deals. And then I switched into education, and I was the director of marketing at PureMind, as well as teaching music business both at Berkeley and PureMind. And just this week, I started teaching music business for Icon Collective, who a school down in Los Angeles that I co-wrote, or actually I wrote 2 new courses for them. And those are launching this week for their music production students. And there's a course on branding and a course on visual design. So I've really shifted my career focus from working for someone in the music industry to starting my own business and working on the visual and branding side to do photo shoots with artists, to help artists understand their visual brand, understand the foundational aspects of why a website's so important, and getting all that kind of thing up and running, and really looking at their digital and visual footprint in the world and why that's so important. Because a lot of artists, I think, get stuck in the studio and they're all about their kick drum sounds and snare drums, and they forget that, they have to then put it forward, and having a good visual presence really helps that. So that's kind of my sweet spot lately. I'm super busy with clients. I'm very blessed right now, and I'm really excited to, again, participate in this and hopefully unlock a few ideas and thoughts for you guys on the attendee side to help you get that fan traction going. So welcome to Get Your First 1,000 Fans. It's a topic that you've really put a lot of time and energy into, Lennon, in your career, especially as of late on your YouTube channel and things like that. And so let's talk about one of the building blocks. I think that, well, actually, let me rewind to give you guys a quick overview of what we're going to talk about, because I think that's important. We're going to talk about understanding your potential fans so that you can really speak to them and give them what they want. We're going to go over the basics of a good brand story. We're going to talk about presenting your brand to your potential fans in a way that really gets them to connect, and some kind of strategies around that. Talk about making money. This is a music business. Even in COVID, we're going to hopefully be able to touch on that. And then lastly, how to jumpstart your growth in terms of building your network. So that's the 2-second overview. So let's dig in, man. Like, understanding your potential fans. What are some ways you've been able to help the artists that you work with, or your own personal experience, really understand potential fans so that they can find them out and give them what they want?
Yeah, what's cool about this concept to me is that, when we were doing a lot of our touring, the internet was a thing, but it wasn't like a thing that was super normal. It was like MySpace was a thing at that point, so that's pretty much what you had at that time. And of course, there was kind of Facebook starting to come up, and then over time we saw the internet really kind of blow up. But as we were looking into, what we even thought of as fans, what we always thought of first was kind of like who is like us, like what's our. And now a lot of what I do, so I also work for a company called Video Creators, where I do strategy for YouTube creators everywhere from like small, just getting started, to I have clients that are like multiple million subscribers. And so we talk about this idea of a target audience a lot. And that can be a really scary term for musicians and creative people, because it feels like we're boxing ourselves in.
Yeah.
And what I want to reverse is that thought process, because what I believe is that when we put parameters around anything that we do that is creativity, we're actually opening up the potential. So if you said, I want to reach people, like my main audience is people that absolutely love, electronic music. They're really into stuff from like the late 90s, and which means that they also probably wear this kind of t-shirt, and they hang out on these places online, and they love like Stranger Things or whatever on Netflix. And these things about this person. This gives you so much ammo in terms of content that you can make. So I talked about, like, I don't believe in tactics, I believe in connection. And connection starts with this moment of like, if you and I met, which is what we did, we don't start with, yo, dude, did you know that I did this thing that was really cool? And you would have been like, dude, you're a freaking dick. Like, I'm not going to talk to you. And so you start with the thought of like, hey man, what are you into?
Yeah.
And then we get that thing going, so we have to think about that, I think, before we even really start to put any sort of effort into the tactical side, for like, which I think is second. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. What about, let's talk about baby bands or artists, producers just getting their career going, and they really, they're looking for fan number one. Like, let's not even talk about fan number 1,000 just yet. So maybe they don't even know how to start that process. And for me, one of the things I found helpful is, for anybody that's making music, you are your first target fan. And so you look at the things that you like, and you look at the things that you're into, whether it's fashion, like you said, or skateboarding, or 80s movies. And you start to build in marketing what we call a persona or an archetype around that person. And so some of your marketing content will go to the people that look just like me. Maybe they're really into beard care, right? Yeah, that's right. Or,
100.
right? And as you grow, you're going to find there's different and multiple personas or archetypes that you're going to be able to develop content to talk to, because clearly you're going to have fans of both gender. You're going to have different age groups. And so, maybe your older fans really enjoy your blog content and really dig in on the written side of what you do versus your YouTube videos. And so you want to think about, as I learn more about the fans that I'm getting, how are they different, and how can I create content to speak to each one of them, right? Would you agree?
Yeah. Totally agree. And a simple way to do that, if you just want like a practical exercise to start, is because here's the thing that I often see musicians do is they attract other musicians.
Right.
And then they ask me, well, why is that? Well, that's because everything you talk about in any of your content or the things that you're presenting is musician speak. You're like hanging out in the studio, love this sweet compressor. Man, I can't believe that I found this VST for only $18.99. You know, like whatever it is that we're like talking about is only geared toward musicians. So think about what I always suggest is find your closest friend that's not a musician, but you guys relate. And think about, what do you guys talk about? And I think that's a great place to start, because then you're going to say, yeah, that's like my best friend. He doesn't play anything, but he still loves the same music that I do. Why? What is it about that? And you can start to find some pieces that you can pull from.
The last piece before we move on, and you mentioned this when we chatted earlier, is about this notion of pain points. Talk about like how that relates within this kind of context.
Yeah. So I use my wife as an example. She's an illustrator. And so while you may say, well, I'm a musician or I'm a producer, like that doesn't apply to me, I think as creatives, it's all the same like notions and techniques, you know. So what she did is she was dealing with postpartum depression as a thing. Like that was part of what spurred her creativity again. So maybe what is it for you that like music is? Like what is it for you when it comes to the thing that makes you want to create? Yeah. And then what she did is she tied that pain point, this thing that was really tough for her, and she said, here's, you know, I'm going to speak to this. I'm going to be vulnerable to my audience, and I'm going to let them know more about what I'm going through. And she went from, in the last year, 0 to about 20,000 subscribers or followers on Instagram, getting hired by Netflix twice, having a write-up in the Huffington Post, Board Panda also writing about her and her content, and then having 2 publications overseas within like literally 2 months. Like the last 2 months, that's all happened. And the reason it happened is because people want to connect to something. Your music, unfortunately, does not speak for itself. And I hate to sound like negative, but trust me, this is as positive as I can say it, is that when you even think about somebody like the Beatles, the reason we love them, I think, is yes, the music, but the music is a calling card to the stories, the lore, all the things that we've like loved about them forever. And those things continue on and on and on. And that's what keeps us having this relationship with their music. Yeah.
Real quick, like my last YouTube video, I open up about some of the creative blocks that I've had within since the pandemic started, right? And the feedback I got from multiple creatives, not even musicians, right? Some illustrators, some photographers, was you know, thank you so much for A, being honest and authentic, and B, sharing, you know, some ideas around what got you through that. And so echoing that sentiment completely, right? It's finding the humanity in what we do, finding that common ground. And then, you know, if you have a solution or even a strategy for getting towards a solution on a pain point, people are going to absolutely connect with that.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, so that's
we'll come back to that too. So keep that thought in mind. Yeah, okay, I think that's important to remember. Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe I'll even make a note of that. So let's talk about what I think is your favorite topic. I might be wrong, but based on conversations we've had, I think I'm right, is brand story. And because you're such a story-driven guy. And so I think we maybe tell a little bit about the story about how you guys got your name as a band, and why that was important to you early on, and what it means today around brand story.
Yeah, so when we started our band, we had a terrible name that is not even worth mentioning.
What was the name before we go any further?
Okay, I will say it was called Amsterband, which is, telling you, terrible, right? And not that it got much better, but the process here, honestly, of renaming and rebranding was really difficult. And but the thing that we wanted more than anything was to be able to carry our heritage and our roots with us, which is we grew up in Southern Missouri in the Ozarks, beautiful like hill country. Music is a big part of the culture there, but definitely more like folk music, things in that vein. But we wanted to carry that with us, even though we did more rock music, and we wanted to be able to tell that story. But the thing that was kind of holding us back was, you know, this name that didn't even fit who we were and what we were all about. And so there was or there still is actually a state park called Ha Ha Tonka State Park, which I know is another unusual name. But what was so cool about that is that we then had to go and contact them and say, hey, is it cool if we use your name? Like we want to go out and yeah, and use this. And they were like, absolutely, that sounds amazing. And because of that, we got a bunch of write-ups inside like regional news, because they were like, holy cow, this is so cool. Band is like taking on their local area and doing this thing. And because of that, anywhere we went, and as we grew and we were able to play like Austin City Limits or Lollapalooza or any of these things, there were moments where we could then tell that story of where we were from. And that was such a cool thing. And so, you know, I when you think about story, and I think it is important to explain what a story is,
Yep.
because we often feel like a story is like, I went to the store and I got a bottle of Pepsi, and then I went home and I pet my dog, and then I went to sleep. Like, that's not a story. That's a series of events, right?
Okay.
A story is literally a character has to want something, and then they have to overcome an obstacle to get that thing. And I want you to think about this, because this is like gold for writing captions on Instagram too. Like, this is legit. So has to overcome something to get that, and then is transformed. So what's the thing that we wanted as a band? To not have this thing that didn't represent us. We wanted something that was wholesome, like that really told who we were. The thing we had to overcome was being able to legally do this thing, plus completely rebranding, deciding if this even felt right. And then we were transformed in that moment where we were able to take what we had and tell the story of our heritage and our culture within that. And so if you think about it in that way, how many times can you tell a story within your own content to bring that to life? Like, have some conflict, have something that makes it interesting.
Yeah, I got a conflict. It's mostly this dog right here. He's joined us now.
I should bring my dog in, but I don't want to.
Lucky everybody. So, anyways, this is work from home life. We all deal with this, right? So, I love that, man. And I think that the other piece I want to highlight, I think, was the importance of the timeline around that. Hadn't you guys just gotten signed when you decided to rename, right? And so, because I get asked this a lot with producers on the electronic side, like, hey, I'm normally doing this kind of music, but now I think I want to do this kind of music. So should I rebrand? These sorts of questions. And it's not a small undertaking, especially if you have some headway and some steam, and you've got some traction with your current artist name. And so, I don't know if you want to share anything around like how heavy that felt and why you felt the need to do it when you did it, and some of those trigger points.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's just a flippin' terrible name. So
well, there's that, but you didn't know me back then, so I would have told you that earlier.
But and for clarity, when I joined, the name already was in existence.
So it wasn't your fault either.
No, so I get all hands off, but I do have to own it, and I love owning it, because it's like, right, if we can't own the mistakes that we made when we were younger and the things that we did that were just us like fumbling through,
right?
Like, who are we ever going to be,
Sure.
But that timing of it was so important, because it made us think, okay, we definitely want to present ourselves in a way that feels so much more authentic. Right. The thing that we came to, though, is that we like the name is not as important as the story behind it. The name is not, like, what you do is not near as important as why you do it. And that's across the board, because when you have something that you're able to talk about in that way, then the name becomes you, right? That's how that stuff starts to happen. When you bring up a certain band, there are all kinds of elements that start to come up in our mind. If I talk about anybody from, as huge and broad as like Taylor Swift to as small and like niche, which isn't too small, but like somebody like Wilco, which is like a little more of an underground like indie band. Those two things are drastically different, but if you know who those bands are, there's imagery, there's story, there's personality that comes to mind inside that as well.
Love it, man. Let's talk about, and I think, again, this is a nice little natural dovetail into the next thing, which is presenting your brand to your potential fan in a way that gets them to connect. So I think now we can kind of talk a little bit about some strategies. For me, a couple things, and I'll kick off and then I'll hand it back over to you. But consistency, like I was just asked by a fairly new artist recently, why do you think I'm not getting traction on these Hype Machine blogs? And I was like, well, your artwork looks great. This song sounds amazing. Like, how many releases do you have? And they said, well, I have one, and it's a single. Okay, well, it might take a little more than one record out in order for you to start getting traction. So I think that with any of us, whether it's for releasing music, whether it's live streaming, whether it's even your visual content on the social media side, consistency is so important. I'm guilty of it too on YouTube. Like I had a bit of a dry spell, with COVID hitting. We get results from the things that we focus on, and if we're focused on releasing consistent music, we're going to see those fan numbers increase, right? We're going to see more traction on the editorial side. Same thing with visual content. You can't post one picture on Twitter and expect to get a whole bunch of new followers, right? Like, I've recently started re-engaging on Twitter in a really meaningful way just this last 30 days. I was stuck at like 1,000 followers for the longest time, and I've added 20% to my follower base within 3 or 4 weeks because I'm focused on it. I'm engaged in it. I'm posting tons of great looking photos. I'm doing my thing, and I've abandoned another blue platform that starts with F, much more in favor of focusing on Twitter and a little bit on Instagram, and it's paid off, right? And so consistency, right? That's a long-winded way of saying consistency is super important. What do you think about other sort of content strategy ideas around, how do we present the brand to those fans and really get them to connect?
Yeah. So I do want to like touch on that consistency idea as an opportunity to go a little deeper and say that
Sure.
Consistency, I think, is pointless without context. If I can lean into that a little bit. And what I love about what you do, Jeff, and I say this with confidence and like not stepping on your toes, because when I see you talk about like this thing that you took a photo of, you're like, today was this crazy day where all of a sudden, like, you guys were dealing with the fires, and you're like, everything went crazy, and all of a sudden there was these beautiful clouds, and I had to like get out and take this photo and do this thing. You gave us context as to why you did it, right? So what I see all the time is people just posting music or just posting photos of themselves and saying like, food porn or hashtag like hanging in the studio. Like that doesn't do anything for anybody, if I'm being real. If we want, what I think about often is, and Seth Godin says it this way, like, how can we show up to serve somebody in that day? And a lot of times that has to do with being prepared to be a little vulnerable or tell something that like that happened that you had to get over or overcome. So if we go back to that story idea, right? Look at any of the guys that are huge on YouTube or really big in any space, be them musicians or not. Like that's what they've gotten really good at, is giving us context as to who they are and what they're all about. So I think that's huge. Probably, I don't want to say it's bigger than the music, but it's up there. If I'm being real, that's my opinion, and I get pushback on that. And I'm open to those discussions. I'll be at the social hour thing tonight. Happy to have a discussion on that.
Love it. What about, because we're doing pretty good on time, anything else like around, what about shows? Like, let's talk about pre-COVID stuff, and let's talk about what that looks like today for just a minute.
Yeah. So, I'll share the strategy that we went by, which was always oversell a situation. So
what do you mean by oversell? Explain that.
Yeah. So it's better to make, maybe it should start this way. It's better to make an experience for somebody, right?
Yeah.
And so if I'm like, I want to go play the Troubadour, and that's cool, everybody wants to play the Troubadour, that's great. But then all of a sudden it's like, we're going to get in there and sell 15 tickets, then it's not going to feel good. There's not an experience,
right.
that you're doing there. So my suggestion is, I often think back to times in New York and stuff in the 60s, and like the way things were, where it was like house parties, hangs, like where was everybody at?
Yeah.
My biggest advice to anybody trying to build something live from square one is to get the smallest room you can that you can fill up and have to turn people away. Because when you turn people away, you're creating a scarcity mindset where people are like, the people that are there are like, holy cow, this is packed. This feels insane. Even if it's 20 people in like a living room, it's going to feel like a party. And that's what we want. And then from there, the people that you turn away are like, holy crap, like that's crazy. I never expected to not get into that thing. What's going on?
Right.
And they're talking to their friends about it. You're creating some sort of buzz, like an experiential buzz. And so I think kind of working your way up in that direction is really smart. So we would always like we'd rather have a line out the door at a 100 cap venue when we were like building than to move up to the next room.
Okay.
Almost any time. Yeah.
That's great. What about anything around, so because you guys did so much touring, talk a little bit about building that audience outside of your local market, because I think that's, maybe some of these people on the, and I can't take a temperature of the room, which is something I always like to do when we get started in these things. But I have to think that some people are like starting to do pretty well in their local market and like, okay, now what? How do I get to be a regional act instead of a only in my city act? And does that same overselling kind of concept play in? And how do you find, just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the best advice I can give for this is it goes back to the first thing I said, which is connection, right? So what we still see work for a lot of people is, who do you know? And it's not that whole thing of like, it's not, it's all who you know, like it is, but it's not who you know, it's how you know them. So when you, like you and I would have never been on here if we didn't like hit it off and have like long hours worth of conversation, at a conference. And so when you meet somebody, and I guess we'll go deeper into this with the last side of it, but when you meet somebody, you want to really like connect with them. And so a lot of what we did was exchanges, to where it's, okay, you draw 50 people in your hometown. We draw 75 in ours. Like, you come play a show with us, we'll have you open, and then we'll flip flop. And we just kind of alternated that. And what we did is set up a little touring route regionally. So we would tour only on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights in the beginning. And so we would have a 6-week cycle where it's like, we're going to be in the same market every 6 weeks. And that way you're developing, similar to what we talk about on social media now, consistency. Because the new people that see you, all you have to do is say, we're going to be back on this date, please come hang out. And they're like, oh man, yeah. And they only played for 30 minutes and now they're going to come back and play for an hour and a half. Like, I want to come hang out. That sounds awesome.
And they're going to bring their friends.
Exactly.
The next time, right? So you get that organic growth and that word of mouth.
Yeah. And in addition to that, like, I'll be real, in the beginning, we were sleeping on floors. We were hanging with everybody. We were going up to every venue manager, every promoter, every bartender, and saying, thank you so much for taking care of us tonight. It didn't matter if there was 2 people in the room. We were saying, thank you for taking care of us. This means the world to us. And I can't tell you how many gigs we ended up getting from great promoters that were like, these guys are so sweet and they're great, so we want to help them out.
I echo that so very much. In the thousands of shows I've played, I had a good talk with the Ohm Records artist Jay Boogie about how to get more gigs. So along the same lines, and it's absolutely one of the things he echoed was, first of all, you be nice to everybody, not because you're hoping to get something out of it, but that coat check girl might be running her own party in 3 months, right? Yeah. That promoter might end up buying his own venue, and if you're his favorite act, then guess who gets a residency? And people need, and this goes across the board, whether you're playing shows or not. I think that it's a basic human thing. Back to this notion of shared pain points. People want to be acknowledged, man. I take that same sort of mode of thinking when I go to Safeway and grocery shop. Like, I thank the cashier. I talk to them. I look them in the eye through a mask, right? But that bit of positivity then that they give back, they're like, oh my, they look up from their thing and they're like, oh my, well, thank you for asking. I'm doing great. How about you? That then makes me feel better. And when I go take photos later that night, I'm in a better headspace, right? So that little bit of paying it forward or whatever, if we're going to get a little corny with it, ends up impacting my creativity later in the day. And so, that's just a notion of like, let's push more positivity. Let's acknowledge other human beings for the work that they're doing, whether it's in the creative space or not. And it's going to pay dividends to you. Yeah. And that might not be short-term dividends. That might be a long-term play, but I guarantee you it starts to pay off I've built a whole career on how can I help you, whoever you are sitting in front of me, like what value can I provide to you, whether that's doing an in-store at my record store back, when I first had my first gig in San Francisco, versus like, can I maybe get your song licensed on CSI Miami and make you a bunch of money? Like I would hook up the people that were in my network as much as I could, and not even like, part of it was my job and part of it was just that's who I am. And it's been able to, so I'm speaking from experience. This isn't just some sort of theory. I've been able to now start my own business and have the effect of that like positivity I've radiated out to my network come back to me in the form of, well, man, I know what you're doing now and I want to work with you. And so, it's important.
Dude, it's so important. I mean, and if we want to get back to this idea of tactics versus like connection, if we look at social media, it's called social media, but most people aren't even being social on it. They're like, please like my thing.
It's like a funnel of just content spout.
Yeah, and we heard him saying it in the previous talk, where it's like, get in there. If somebody comments, comment. But I totally agree with that. But do it from a place that's heartfelt. Don't just say thanks. Like, ask them questions. A great starter question, if you ever want to know, is don't ask them what they do. This is anywhere, right? Ask them, what are you working on right now that you're excited about? Man, that changes the game when it comes to getting into somebody's conversation wheel. And it's so cool because, like you said, people just want to be seen and heard. And the more we do that, it helps everybody, including ourselves. I love that you said that, Jeff. That's so good.
Great. And I think certainly certain platforms are easier to get that conversation flow going than others, but it really can be done on any of them, So we're at the half-hour mark. I know we got a little bit of a late start. I've got a timer going here, so I think we're around 32 minutes or something. So consider our bet timers. Let's talk about making money from that audience once it exists, or as we're building it. What really gets a fan to fork over their hard-earned cash? Like, I think first of all, let's just be very clear that your Instagram followers are not quote unquote your 1,000 fans that we're talking about here, right? Your Facebook likes on your music page are not the 1,000 fans that we're talking about within this context. We're talking about fans that are willing to support you beyond a cheap like and then never engaging with you down the road. Now, there's different layers and levels of fans. Maybe that's the baby step, so that it is in the ecosystem of a fan building relationship. But when someone pulls out their wallet and forks over their credit card or their PayPal on your site to pick up a piece of merch, we're going to talk about some of these strategies, but that's the end goal, is we're trying to have some sort of a financial transaction with these fans in order to support our art and in order to build a career in the music business. And so we've hammered on relationship. We know we have to have a relationship with that fan first. But what do we do? Like, once we've got good conversations going with our fans, we've got newsletters that are getting engagement, and we're replying to our comments on YouTube and on Twitter. What next? Like, how do we get them to convert from a conversational relationship to a transactional relationship?
Yeah, this is where I think, honestly, studying some form of like basic marketing is really important. And I encourage it to all my personal clients, that, and part of a course that I'm working on is the basics of what's an email list look like. And I'm not talking about an email list like I'm going to send you a newsletter. I'm talking about something where you're providing like real value to somebody, right? So that exchange happens, I think, multiple ways. So if I may, I'll touch a little bit on like options for revenue streams, because I think that may be a good place to start.
Yeah.
So the first thing you can do is obviously be a service-based thing. So for most producers or musicians, a service that you would offer would be playing a show, or you could go a level deeper and be like, I do sessions, or I offer ways to produce your track, right? Or I do mixing or whatever, right? So then you have the opportunity to also do more consulting kind of stuff, which is what I've started to lean into as I've gotten more into this marketing side, where this is usually a way to make faster money, but it doesn't need to be just around your music. And so this is where I start to lean a little left of what everybody else talks about for like art marketing, because
Okay.
I actually believe that in many ways as creatives and artists, like we hold our like art in this like really cherished place, and to try and monetize that sometimes just feels flippin' dirty, like if we're just being real.
Right.
And so I encourage people to not even like then let that feel dirty, let that be what it is. I did an interview with a classical pianist who independently sold out Carnegie Hall.
Ooh.
And the thing that she talked about, because I asked her this, like, how do you balance like commerce and creativity? And she said, my creative person here, this creative version of me is like a baby. It's like my child. And I don't expect this child to make my money. So the way she explained it is like, if a child wants ice cream, they're not going to figure out like, how do I make the money to get this ice cream? They're just like, give me the ice cream, Dad. You know, I have 2 kids myself. And that's exactly what they do. Like, it costs money. What does that mean? They don't care, right? So she says, I want to keep that innocence with the actual thing that I create. And therefore, I've opened up this other side of what I do. And so when we talked earlier about your person, and you said, or I was talking a little bit about this idea of like, what are the other things? So if you think of your brand like a building, so you have music as a part of that. For me, like talking about anxiety, mental awareness, mindfulness, spirituality, production, editing, content creation. There's all these levels of what I talk about, all based on this person. And so now any one of those can be turned into something. So you may have an audience where you're like, where you have gone through something with a mentor and they've taught you how to figure out how to get past your own mental blocks and be able to create whatever you want to create. Maybe you've done that. You can monetize that into something that you offer as a workshop for your followers that are also creatives. So just learning to sort of think outside the box and not make it always feel like the music or the merch is the only thing. Right. So then if I can sidestep though into the music and the merch, especially merch, I want to say that because that is kind of physical goods are one of the ways that you can monetize. The thing that I see a lot of bands sort of missing out on is that merch represents the person.
Right.
So if you think of it like your music is a certain way or there's a certain ideal behind it, that's the thing that you should be pushing with the merch. Then you have a lot more opportunity. So you can still have like your band logo and things like that. But I talk about ConvertKit a lot, who's an email service provider for creative people. So if you're trying to get an email list, check out ConvertKit, not sponsored. Okay. But they have a shirt that says create every day. And what they've done is created this shirt that represents the person that they know that likes their stuff. Right. And it's not about like their brand is not first. So you make it more about the person that is going to be wearing it. And this is why things become shareable as well. If you're even talking about content, like real shareable content is something that represents that person that's going to share it more than it represents you as the creator. And I think that's where we start to like miss out on some of that. Is that the Peter McKinnon thing?
It is. So yeah, I'm a bit of a fanboy. Right there we go. Thank you, Cannon, for focusing. This is Peter's new coin from his Pete's Pirate Life sub-brand. And, it doesn't say Peter McKinnon on it anywhere, but people that know. It also came in this crazy cool wood box. Like, talk about overselling. Like, and this box was inside another super cool box. So and these are drops that are super limited, right? And so he's got scarcity going. He's got overselling going because it's hard to get into that room. He's over delivering in terms of the value that I expected for what I just thought I was getting this coin. Now it also comes in a little leather case. So
cool.
We can learn so much. And Peter, although he's a musician, what he became known for is as a photographer and a YouTuber. And so, learning from guys and brands outside of our core space is also really important. I think we kind of alluded to that, but some of the strategies from like a brand like Supreme or a brand like Peter McKinnon that are doing these kind of limited edition drops, and that doesn't have to be a mega giant event. Like if you have 100 fans, you can do a drop of 20 printed, hand printed, hand screen printed shirts or something along those lines. It doesn't have to be the biggest of big things, to still try and start working towards some of these concepts. Would you agree with that?
Totally. And I would say it the same way that I talked about the shows, where it's like less is more and get it out the door. Like the
Right.
faster that you can do that, the more that you have an opportunity to create that thing where it's like, dang it, I missed that one. That's the one I wanted, and then the reorder and all that stuff, it just makes it different. And so the same thing can be said for music now, because everybody's digital. Like, make the physical product special so that when they buy the physical product, they know there was only, if you're small, don't be ashamed to say, I only printed 50 of these, and
Right.
that's all I got. Like, don't
When-
be afraid of where you're at, because your fans are going to love that you're so open and honest. We get caught up in this thing of like, I got to be the biggest thing. Screw that noise. Your fans love you for who you are. They're what we call the early adopters. They're the ones that want to be there for you at the base level, or they wouldn't be there. So don't feel like you got to flex and be something you're not. It's just, it's not necessary.
That's really great. I think we've talked about, you and I have talked about how art has kind of been devalued, sadly, by the internet, especially both visual art and music, right? And so my buddy Abe started the brand and site BeatStars years ago when we worked together at In Groups. BeatStars has become this amazing
Huge
e-commerce platform for producers to monetize their beats. And so I think that route, and looking at things like sample packs and construction kits and sound design elements, on sites like BeatStars, on sites like Audio Jungle, which are, if you don't know about sort of production music libraries, they represent a very different way for you to think about your music as a product and be able to sell it to a different audience. Maybe a corporation, maybe you're good at writing jingles, maybe you're good at writing little logo swirl sounds for intros. There's a market for all of that kind of audio that can be created, that doesn't even have to, like, you can have a storefront on one of those sites and have it not even tied to your artist brand. No one has to know if you don't want them to. Like, if you feel like, oh, well, doing corporate sound design is going to mess up my cool death metal, cred that I have. No one has to know. Like, you can have two separate and distinct brands and create multiple revenue streams. And I think that's one of the things that today, more than ever, but certainly in the last 5-10 years, multiple revenue streams have become so important. As physical media sales have declined, you can't just press up 1 million CDs and expect to sell them at retail anymore. Finding other ways to monetize what we do, and also to the point of like treating your art like a child, that's going to feel less like the song that you spent 6 years toiling over and perfecting and writing. It's going to feel more like, oh, I'm making some corporate sound design. Like, I'm just going to put a different sort of hat on in my producer chair and crank out some stuff that's marketable, that doesn't have to be your true artist soul coming through, right? But it can still help you make some money doing something you love, instead of having to have a side hustle or an Uber or, like a gig like that. You're still making music, you're still making sounds. It's just a different way to think about it. And so I think that both production music, I think that places like BeatStars, I'm sure there's other ones. I just know that they're doing great, and so it's a good one to throw out to you guys if you're not familiar with them. I just think that any of that sort of stuff, as you think of alternate revenue streams, along with merch, along with services that you can provide, cobbling all of these things together and keeping all of them fresh and all of them at the forefront for yourself, is really important. The other piece is that some days, man, you just aren't a songwriter. Like, you can just sit and stare at that piano or your guitar, and as well as me, it just doesn't come out. And so for you to still be able to be productive around your career, whether that's through, it's all sorts of sort of administrative stuff I'm sure you could get to, but even if you just are in the studio and you want to make something that's not feeling uber creative, maybe it's time to shift gears into like, I'm just going to work on sounds. Like, look at Decap, who I'm sure everyone here knows because he's been a really big proponent here at Music Expo. Decap has sold millions of his Beats That Knock series. Like, just
samples,
I'm so
everything.
thrilled to see the success that he's had with that, right? And so if you make your own sounds, or maybe you've never tried, maybe that's something you might love, like explore. Until I picked up a camera working at my last gig, I didn't know. I'd forgotten. Let me just restate that, because I did shoot photos when I was a kid. I forgot how much I love it. And I was immediately drawn to, oh my God, I love shooting photos with people, specifically with musicians. And not only that, I love the feedback I get when someone sees a really amazing photo of themselves. Maybe it's their first proper photo shoot. That moment is like, oh, I thrive on that. And so I found my thing. And
Yeah.
I'm thrilled every time I get to pick up my camera. And so you gotta be willing to explore and try new things. And you might stumble into something that becomes like, I've made far more money doing photography around music than I ever did as a musician. And I've been doing it for a lot less time, like 10 times less time, right? We
Yeah.
don't know. You're having amazing success as a consultant, and you're not touring anymore, and you're not. Don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid to try new things. Like, that's kind of where I'm getting at from this.
Yeah, man, that's all freaking brilliant. Yeah, it's so true. I love that you brought up the camera thing, because again, I think what we see, if I'm being real, is fear. We just fear like, oh, but if I'm doing this camera thing and I'm a producer, like that doesn't make any sense, right? Or people are gonna think less of me because I'm not doing music full time. Or,
Right.
man, it ain't true. Like anything that I can tell you is that every time I followed my gut to say, oh, this is a thing that I'm actually good at, and I'm going to follow it down the rabbit trail and see what happens, my doors have opened up to a whole new world of things that it's like we're building this. Our life is this spider web that we're building. We think that success looks like this. It doesn't. It looks like this, and then back, and then up, and then it's like a bunch of loop-de-loops, and then it's like over here, and then all of a sudden we're getting eaten by a crocodile. Like, it doesn't look like what we think. And 9 times out of 10, you're never going to predict how you're going to be successful. You may have goals, and it's important to have goals, because
Yes.
without knowing what you want, you can't ever get it. But know what you want with the preparation to be interrupted in the journey, because man, it's going to happen. Guarantee it.
Well said. All right, so let's touch on this last. Let me just check our time here. Let's touch on our last topic quickly, and then we'll open it up for some questions. Jump starting your growth process by building your network. Diving in real quick. So two bullets about this from me, and then I'll hand it over to you. One is, when I was doing film and TV licensing in Los Angeles, I was still based up here in San Francisco. And so everyone else that was sort of competing with me to meet those music supervisors and to get their songs on those TV shows lived in LA. And so they were out seeing them at the bars more, at the shows more, and that networking piece was a lot easier for them. And so I really learned to make the most of every time I'd go down there for a conference, or every time I went down there for client meetings, and just trying to add literally one new contact on that trip. Like the Billboard Film and TV Music Conference. I used to go every year for like 10 years. Amazing conference. And I got really close with a music supervisor named PJ Bloom, and he was notoriously like hard to get into the inner circle with. And for whatever reason, we hit it off, probably because I didn't shove music down his fucking throat, right? And so he saw me as a real person. And I had incredible amounts of success with him on his shows with the music that I was representing. And so, but it came from that notion of, let's build this one at a time. You don't go to a conference thinking, I want to come home with a stack of business cards and that's what's going to show that I did well. Like, there's no depth there. It's like surface. How many people could I throw my thing at? So that's one piece, is making one meaningful connection. Maybe it's today here at Music Expo. The other piece is, well, I'm gonna hand it over to you, because I sort of lost my train of thought. So building your network. Why is it so important?
Dude, I love that you said that, because it's how we met, right? And
Yep.
So, I've been toying with this analogy of like our career and like the way we treat creativity as like making orange juice, right? Oftentimes, like we have an orange and we like cut it in half and we squeeze the hell out of it until we got this glass full of juice, and then we're left with this like pulp and like a freaking,
Rind.
peel. Yeah. And that's it. And so, but now we got this class of juice and we're like, cool, we did it. But what's next, right? I think about even like getting to write with a Grammy nominee or making a ton of money off a commercial sync or doing any of these other things. Like if that was squeezing the orange and that was all I expected, then I was done. There was never going to be any other opportunity. Okay. So I think we have to think of it way more like we're farming the frickin', orange fields where it's like, I don't even know what those are called. Orchards?
I'm from Florida.
Thank
I'm
you.
just going to set a few things straight here. I know a lot about orange juice. This is a great analogy. I'm glad.
Told you guys I'm in great hands. So, but if we think of it that way, then, some days we're like planting the seeds. Some days we're picking the fruit and some days we're making the juice. And we don't always know when that's going to happen.
Right.
But I would totally think that going to these conferences or doing these things, like you're planting seeds. Those things don't, like, how long ago did we meet? It was like a year, a little over, almost a year now.
Basically a year ago, yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to think from a professional standpoint, nothing came of our relationship until now, just from a professional standpoint. But that didn't matter because we got to just hang out and enjoy each other's company, right? And sometimes that's the way it works, is that it's just going to take a long time to see that happen. And I've seen it with my friends where, and people say this too, and I'm full blown experiential part of this, where don't try to go after the person that's already there. Go for the person that is going for it, right? Because those are the people that are going to come up, and they're going to be the ones that pull you along with them. So a lot of my personal career is the same way. Like I have friends that are now singing backup for Roger Waters, and other friends that are doing incredible stuff like getting to play Saturday Night Live and doing all these other things. And they're helping me get gigs or taking me to concerts or doing things, and it's like, that's not anything but a friendship. That's all that was. And it started with networking, right? It started with this opportunity to do what we do. And that was really it. So I love that as a statement. And I'll say too, if you're like, well, I don't know anybody like that, figure out how to get yourself in that room, with some of those people. And so that's what Jeff was talking about, I think, with the conferences, is sometimes you have to invest in yourself, which is what you guys have done today. So kudos to you all for valuing yourself enough to spend money on making yourself better. Because I can't tell you, there are countless people out there that expect that it's all going to be given to them for free. But a person that builds a restaurant doesn't get the luxury of getting the whole flipping building handed to them for free. And that's what we've got. The internet, the whole building is given to us for free. So now it's our opportunity to find, and we may have to pay along the way, those people that are going to help us get to the next place.
Yeah, shout out to Stefan from Balanced Breakfast, who is here later today with Mark from ArcLaw. It's another sort of networking group, right? And they have branches all over in different cities and markets. But he's somebody that I've met and seen, and I think I've met at a music expo. He invited me to speak at his conference, and then told me that this agency was looking for photographers, and made a call with them, and then they flipped me a client pitch, and that client pitch just turned into gigs. It's like, you just never know how many layers deep something like that's going to go. And if I don't, we don't get paid to come here and do Music Expo, but I know it's a good opportunity for me. It connects me with other professionals that are up to big things, like guys like you. It opens up potential client relationships and I've been on the attendee side of plenty of things too. We met at Vid Summit, where here in the music world, I've got a career, I have things to share, I have things to knowledge to impart. On the video creator side, I'm brand new, and I'm the first one to say it. And so I was just in the attendee seat. I met guys like Jevin Dovey, who has 500,000 YouTube subscribers.